because it seemed like currently they're important for skeptics. They're hard-hitting, but they're also good for believers to just get a little taste of to use in conversations. So you don't have to remember, how many mutations are being added, each generation. As long as you remember that there are mutations being added each generation, DNA is decaying, and that's something that you can share with people. And if they challenge you, you can look it up. You can Google it. It's easy to find. It's really out there. So that will help you in sharing with friends who are a little bit skeptical. But also, philosophically, there are very strong philosophical, logical reasons to reject secularism, to reject atheism. So there are many ways to test a worldview or a philosophy. Okay? One of those ways is by testing whether the statements or the worldview is true. Okay? And by true, I mean actually matches reality. Okay? Not what you think is true or what's true for me is not true for you. I'm not talking about that kind. I'm talking about actually matching reality. So worldviews, philosophies, ways of thinking like Christianity, atheism, Hinduism, Islam, they make statements about the world. So one of the ways of testing them is to compare them to the world, to reality. Is what they say true? But there's another way of testing a worldview or a philosophy, and that's by looking for internal consistency. Okay? Is this philosophy, is this religion, is this worldview, is this way of thinking consistent with itself? Okay? That's very important, because any philosophy, any way of thinking that is contradictory to itself cannot be true. All right? Let me give you an example of something that cannot be true. Suppose I asked you, Pastor Dan, in the lobby is a married bachelor. Would you please bring him in here?
Couldn't find him.
What? No, he's out there. Just go get him. I'm sorry. Oh, you know what? The married bachelor, he has with him a square circle. Would you please bring it in? If you're not going to bring the married bachelor in, would you please go get the square circle and bring it in?
I'll look.
Right? Right? These concepts are contradictory. There is no such thing as a square circle. It's a contradiction. Such a thing does not exist. Okay? The same with a married bachelor does not exist by the definition of the words themselves. So you want to examine a philosophy, a worldview, to see if there are any internal contradictions. So we're going to take a look tonight at the worldview of atheism, naturalism, and its partner, evolution. Okay? Let's back up to, okay, I talked about contradictory or necessarily married bachelors, blah, blah, blah. So a worldview that defines truth in a way that it fails to meet is false. Okay, so I'm going to give you the example of logical positivism. Logical positivism was the reigning philosophy during the early 20th century. Okay? The early 20th century, logical positivism was where it was at if you were a philosopher. What it means is it's the belief that only statements of a scientific nature are true. Okay? Only things that can be proved empirically contain truth. Only propositions that can be tested empirically have truth value. This is called logical positivism. So, if you're a logical positivist, you believe that, silly religious people, when you make the claim God exists, right, that's your claim, that statement cannot be tested scientifically. Therefore, it doesn't contain any truth. There is no truth value to it. It's not even true or false. It's a nonsense statement because it cannot be empirically tested. Now, believe it or not, this reigned in the universities, in academia. It was the most respected philosophy of the day. Along came a couple of philosophers, one of them whom I'll introduce to you in a minute, by the name of Alvin Plantinga. And they showed that that idea contradicts itself, because the very idea cannot be proved scientifically. You can't prove scientifically that only claims that are empirical are true. So the theory undercut itself. It committed suicide. And within a decade, logical positivism had collapsed because of these philosophers, one in Oxford and one at Notre Dame in the United States, Alvin Plantinga. He's retired now. He's in his 80s. I'm a fellow of the Evangelical Philosophical Society, so I've been in meetings, rooms with philosophers where he has spoken. He is he gets standing ovations for just being there, because every philosopher realizes that this man changed the world. The entire reigning paradigm of philosophy was changed. Currently now, it's analytical philosophy, in case you were wondering. All right. So atheism has the same kind of problem. It undercuts itself. It refutes itself. And here's how it does it. Oh, there's Alvin Plantinga. So the information from this talk comes largely from his book, Where the Conflict Really Lies, where he talks about this conflict, this contradiction that is innate to naturalism, materialism, and atheism, and its relationship to evolution. Also, Nancy Pearcey has written about this concept in Finding Truth. It's her latest book. Highly recommend it. Yeah, somebody knows Nancy Pearcey. I mean, she's fantastic. Okay, so evolutionary epistemology. Epistemology is simply the study of knowledge. How do we know things, right? How do we know anything? That's epistemology. How do we know? So atheists claim that the mind is a product of natural selection. The mind is produced by the brain, and the brain is a product of evolutionary processes. Okay? Our ideas that we have in our head have been selected over time by evolutionary processes, the pressures of natural selection. Okay? So the ideas in our head are only there because they help us to survive. All right? Now what happens if we apply this idea to itself? Right? The idea that the only reason we're holding ideas in our head is because they help us to survive and not because they're true. This discredits itself. If you apply this idea to itself, it means that you don't hold those ideas because they're true. You hold those ideas because it helps you survive. Here is a quote from atheist philosopher John Gray. If Darwin's theory of natural selection is true, the human mind serves evolutionary success, not truth. Okay? Francis Crick, one of the co-discoverers of DNA that we just spent so much time on. Our highly developed brains, after all, were not evolved under the pressure of discovering scientific truths, but only to enable us to be clever enough to survive. So evolution actually is fighting against atheism. If you think Darwin's theory is true, then you believe it because it helps you survive, not because it's true. Right? So we're in this conflict, we're in this paradox, right? This contradiction. It's like the liar's paradox, right? This statement is a lie. Well, now wait a minute. If the statement is true, then it's not true. It's not a lie. But it says that it is a lie. How can that be? Or if I say to you, I cannot speak a word of English, did I contradict myself? Absolutely I did. Did I give you any information? It doesn't contain any information because it's contradictory. It is truly, it makes no sense. It is truly nonsense. Nonsense doesn't contain any information, and a contradiction is an example of nonsense. So the relationship between atheism and evolution is nonsense. The theory commits suicide. Next. Okay, so now it is true that some ideas would come about because of would happen to be true because of their survival ability, right? Their ability to help us survive. So for instance, a caveman would likely survive if he realizes that lions can kill him, right? And the caveman who believes that lions are his friend is likely to get eaten. But that isn't necessarily true. Because what if the caveman thinks that the best way to behave towards a friend is to kill him or to run away from him and hide in a cave? Guess what happens? He survives. So that false idea that the lion is his friend and the best way to treat a friend is to run away and hide in a cave helps him survive and will be passed on if this theory is true. So false ideas can also have a survival benefit. But which one of our ideas are false? Because remember, to have an idea is to think it's true. Right? You don't have ideas that you think are false. Right? If you think they're false, you don't believe them. You think they're false. So which ideas are true and which are adaptive but false, there is no way for us to tell. We cannot know it. Everything that we believe, we might only believe because it helps us to survive. Evolutionary epistemologist Eric Baum, he's an expert in how the mind works based on evolutionary theory. Quote, sometimes you are more likely to survive and propagate if you believe a falsehood than if you believe the truth. Cognitive scientist Steven Pinker, our brains were shaped for fitness, not for truth. Sometimes the truth is adaptive, but sometimes it is not. So survival, the mere fact that we have survived or that an idea survives is no guarantee that it's true, according to this theory. And in fact, evolution teaches us that we believe lies all the time. Right? Evolution has produced all sorts of false ideas according to evolutionists, like religion. Right? Atheists believe that evolution produced religion. That's a false idea according to them. Yet, apparently, the vast majority of the 6 or 7 billion people on the planet believe this false idea. They believe that many atheists believe free will is not true. There is no such thing as free will. You don't have free will. You are simply the result of the chemical and electrical reactions happening in your brain. You have the illusion of having free will. But there is no such actual thing as free will. It's a false idea that was put in your brain by evolution, according to the atheist. Consciousness, the very fact, I mentioned we were going to be coming to this concept of consciousness. Consciousness, they believe, is an illusion. There's no soul there. There's no spirit there inside the brain, inhabiting the brain. This opinion that there's an I, that there's a real me other than my body, right? That's what I think. I think there's a me. I know I have a brain, but I think I own a brain. I don't think I am my brain. I think I have a brain, right? According to evolutionary epistemology, according to many, many atheists, that's a false idea. That idea is false. There is no you there. There is only the chemical reactions of your brain. It's only, mix two chemicals together and you get fizziness. It's just that fizziness happening. That's what is consciousness. So you can now ask the question then, why isn't the theory of evolution just an illusion? Because it helps you to survive. It's perfectly possible. There's no way to know. You're surviving and you believe in evolution, so it must be true, right? It must be the case that evolution helped you survive. So the theory undermines itself. It refutes itself. If the theory is true, then the theory is false, right? You don't have any good reason for believing it. Next. Leon Wesseltier, quote, "If reason is a product of natural selection, then how much confidence can we have in a rational argument for natural selection? Evolutionary biology cannot invoke the power of reason even as it destroys it." Thomas Nagel, we talked about atheist philosopher Thomas Nagel. Here's a quote, "Is the evolutionary hypothesis really compatible with continuing confidence in reason?" This was the part you were talking about, consciousness and reason, "as a source of knowledge?" His answer is no. I have to be able to believe that I follow the rules of logic because they are correct, not merely because I am biologically programmed to do so. Insofar as the evolutionary hypothesis itself depends on reason, it would be self-undermining. So atheists recognize the self-refuting nature of holding those two beliefs, evolution and atheism, together. Charles Darwin even recognized this. Here's a couple of quotes from Charles. "With me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the conviction of a man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. There isn't any reason to think so." Here's what he said in a letter to a friend. "I feel compelled to look to a first cause having an intelligent mind in some degree analogous to that of man. When he looked at the evidence of biology on the planet Earth, he felt compelled that there must be a God that created this. Yet he thought, but then arises the doubt. Can the mind of man, which has, as I fully believe, been developed from a mind as low as that possessed by the lowest animal, be trusted when it draws such grand conclusions? So he applied this theory only to religion, only to the idea that God exists. And he said, you know what? My brain's a product of evolution, so my ideas about God aren't reliable. But he didn't apply it to evolution. He should have been a little more skeptical in his skepticism about things. Here's an atheist who talks about how this undermines even science. It undermines the ability to do science. If our cognitive capacities were simply evolved dispositions, there would be no way of knowing which of these capacities lead to true beliefs and which to false ones. To view humans as little more than sophisticated animals undermines confidence in the scientific method. And for good reason. Again, you could never know what your brain was telling you, whether it was true or not. Okay? John Lennox, philosopher from Oxford and mathematician. The mind that does science is the end product of a mindless, unguided process. Now, if you knew your computer was the product of a mindless, unguided process, you wouldn't trust it. So to me, atheism undermines the rationality I need to do science. Okay. So in fact, the case is that only those who affirm a rational creator have any reason for trusting human rationality. There must be a mind, an intelligence that created my mind in order for there to be any basis for me to trust what my mind thinks, what my ideas that I hold are. So if you are a skeptic today, don't just be skeptical of religion. Be skeptical of atheism. Be skeptical of especially the combination of atheism and evolution, because theoretically it's still possible for God to exist and evolution to have occurred, but it is not possible for atheism to exist, or at least it's not possible to know